So I got a panicked message from my client the other day. She was live, like right in the middle of training for her membership. She realized her slides were not showing on camera, and I was in the middle of feeding my dog, Abby the Chihuahua, when I saw the message. So I dropped everything and I rushed to my computer. A couple hundred people were watching when I pulled up the stream, and my heart just sank. She was apologizing profusely, telling her audience she was sorry for wasting their time. And oh my gosh, I could just feel how uncomfortable she was, scrambling, clicking every button she could think of, trying to fix something when she didn't even know what was wrong exactly. She said, I'm sorry, I don't know why it's not working. It always works. And she was right. It did always work because I had set it up to just work, right? But there was one tiny change in her workflow, and that is all it took to throw literally everything off. So here's the thing, the issue itself was simple, but fixing it live, to walk her through fixing it live, in fact, that would have taken 2, maybe 3 minutes, which is an eternity when you're the one on screen and people are waiting. Do you feel me? Right? And that's why I jumped in, because my number one priority, whether I'm running your webinar, your live launch, or troubleshooting behind the scenes, is always, always, always the audience experience. And in this case, that meant actually pivoting to plan B really fast so that she could keep things moving without going over time. Now, ideally, that would have never happened in the first place. We ideally want no tech issues at all, but it did happen because of one simple thing, and that was her tech workflow. That is not the right button. Tech issues go wrong because my tech workflow I didn't put where it needed to go right before I started going live. So I want you to tell me in the chat right now, how many times have you been just live clicking away at buttons, hoping to keep the audience engaged and sticking around while you fumble around? Tell me in the chat right now. So here's the truth. Your tech isn't the problem. Tech is really just a tool. It does what you tell it to do. The real issue is that you need a streamlined, repeatable tech workflow that works with you, not against you. And that is the key to showing up with confidence every single time. Because at the end of the day, your audience's experience depends on your experience behind the scenes. Do you feel me? And when you have a smooth system in place, you can focus on what really truly matters, which is delivering your message, engaging with your audience, and making an impact. So let's make sure that your tech is working for you and with you so that you can focus on what you do best. My goal for you today is to understand what makes a good tech workflow so that you can have a smoother experience running your videos, your live streams, your webinars, your virtual events, or your podcasts. So what does make a good workflow? So there are 3 things that I want to go through with you. And the first thing is I want you to start at the end. Most people think tech workflow, the gear, all of it is just the same, but it's really not necessarily. So what type of video are you delivering? Is it a live stream? Is it a webinar? Is it a virtual event? Is it a podcast? Do you have co-hosts, right? Like there are different types of things that we need to identify. And of course you're thinking about it, but I want you to be intentional about that. So when you think about the main type of video or live event that you are doing, type that in the chat right now. What is that one thing that you're focusing on as we think about this live? So yes, I see we've got live stream, reacting. Okay, yes. And then we've got, yes. Okay, I see everybody's really on, like still talking about their issues, which is why I'm doing this video for you. Okay, so that's the first thing. Start at the end. Tag is saying Zoom training. Fantastic. So when you know that there is the live stream versus Zoom training, right? Then we can say, okay, well, what's the second thing? What type of gear do we need? Each type of video that you're creating, mostly it can kind of stay the same, but there might be some unique needs. For example, if sometimes you do, walking around content, maybe you have a whiteboard that you're walking to the whiteboard and coming back, then you need a lapel mic for that, or you get really more complicated in terms of the tech. But maybe when you're doing the podcast, then you're going to actually need a podcast mic, right? So I want you to be thinking about the gear, the end result, and then we think about which gear is specifically needed to swap out for these different end results. If you have a webinar, if you're doing a webinar, then I would not do a webinar without 2 monitors, right? 2 monitors is really key for a webinar, because you actually might want to, you need to split out your assets, which we're going to talk about here in a second. And so I want you to kind of think through this. And those of you who are in live, in the the launch experience, then you guys have a checklist with this. So I'm actually simulcasting right now to YouTube and inside of my private training experience. And so those of you who are there, you have a link to a cheat sheet to help you work through this. Now, if you're doing a virtual event, then maybe you need something with a whole bunch more monitors, right? This is like a little out there, but in our virtual event that we did called Expand Your Reach, it was incredibly helpful to have these different monitors, these different TVs versus monitors, because of the experience that we were trying to create. So I want you to think about what was the thing that you're trying to accomplish. What specific pieces of gear do you need to accomplish that thing? And here's a pro tip. In terms of monitors, I actually want you to think about monitor placement. This is a conversation that I have, and often, because a lot of people will put their monitors down below, right? Their camera, and then they're looking down. What I want you to do instead is put your monitors side by side in between the camera and or teleprompter. Why? Because I want to mimic everything I do with a digital form. I want to mimic the human to human in-person experience. And if I'm a human, I'm looking off to the side, right? As I talk, I don't look down, because if I looked down at you, guess what? That would be very inappropriate, right? So I don't want you to look down to your monitor. I want you to look off to the side, because that's a natural human behavior. So that's something to really consider in terms of your gear workflow and where you're placing things. That's a big pro tip for you. And I want you to ask yourself, where is the friction in this gear workflow that you're trying to create? What's the friction point? If you're thinking about the tech, you don't have a good tech workflow, right? All right, so the third thing that you need to do is think about is what software assets. So we've covered the gear, the hardware, but what software assets do you need? Are you going to be screen sharing? If so, are you going to be using slides or a browser? Because that's going to change your software workflow. Are you going to have a guest or co-host? Are you going to bring Zoom attendees up to ask questions during your presentation? How many camera angles do you actually need? And this setup, right, with the gear that you just saw, I have 2 camera angles. Are you going to use your prompter for Zoom gallery, where you can look your participants in the eye? Or are you going to use it for notes, like I am today, to keep myself on track and going through the presentation, right? So another pro tip here is that each asset is going to add to the complexity. So if you don't feel comfortable with tech, I want you to start simple. Don't add a second camera. Don't do a more complicated or advanced thing in your flow. If you do, feel comfortable with the tech, then you can add all of the layers. But keep in mind, the more you do, the more testing you need to do, and the more potential for things you need, or more potential for things to go wrong in the moment, like earlier we saw, right? Because I didn't go through that beforehand. So these are really important things to think about. Checklists, massively, massively important as well. All right, so speaking of, this video, as I mentioned, is a sneak peek at some of the training inside of the Launch Booster experience. And I see Marco on YouTube. I see U-Haul in there. I see Environmental Coffee House. I see Jaden. And you guys are going to get something really good here. But in our Launch Booster experience, this is the program that goes beyond the basics to ensure that you have a solid tech workflow and software workflow to deliver a launch experience that feels true to you. And we go deeper, right? To build your own personalized workflow. That's what we're doing today in our long form training, so that you can finally say goodbye to tech-induced nightmares. If you want to do the same, you can join the wait list, so that you might actually get to join. One day we'll have some more free training and go deeper with you. All right, now that you understand what makes a good tech workflow, then I really want you to think about the experience, right? So we're creating a good tech gear software workflow for you so that you can show it more confidently and give your viewers a great experience. The one biggest mistake that people make is just that, is not being intentional about your viewer experience. What you identify as your viewer experience, then when you figure that out, it actually makes everything easy. So the colors you choose in your video, from the lighting that you use, are you going to go bright, moody, dark? The software, the graphics that you use to communicate visually with them, everything in between. So how do you choose your viewer experience? And I'm going to ask you guys to type this in the comments. What is the emotion that you want your audience to feel when they watch you? Do you want them to feel jazzed up or pumped up at home, like you're maybe hanging out with them, right? Your friends. Do you want them to feel empowered? Do you want them to feel happy? Do you want them to feel ready to take action on something? All of those different feelings, the emotions, the things that they're thinking and feeling when watching you is going to determine, if you're intentional about this, what actions you take in your workflow setup, right? Gail says, aha, realizations. Yes, I love that. Mike says, motivated to act. Chad says, I want them to feel peaceful and safe. See, this is the one point that people miss so much by not being intentional about that choice. But once you decide it, guess what? Every other choice is so much easier. If you want them, like Chad, to feel peaceful and safe, then you're not going to use red lights in your background, right? If you want the audience to feel like instant friends, maybe you put some trinkets that you know that they're going to like too, because their personality matches yours, right? We kind of craft that experience, the things that the viewers are seeing, feeling, thinking, all the software graphics, all of the colors, the background choices, even the front lighting. If you do want to have more of a homey environment, maybe you'll go a little darker or a little more cinematic with your lighting. So that is your action item. I want you to decide on the feeling that you want to convey. And if you want more and to take this training a step further, go join the waitlist for a free training. And YouTube, I will see you there. I'm going to keep going with my Launch Booster Experience students, and we're going to keep diving deeper. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you next time.